Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So, good afternoon and welcome to this Games at Microsoft Research seminar, which I'm hosting. I'm Daniel Pargman, and this will be a seminar series. If you're not on the distribution list, you can sign up for the auto group MSR Games. Today we have a guest from the UK, actually from the very north, from even beyond the very north, from a small island in the Outer Hebrides. John Kirrimur will talk about libraries, computer games and virtual worlds. So welcome, John.
Thank you. Okay, this presentation will be probably relatively informal, and I'll just probably ramble around various topics and try and put things together. But first of all, can I just check, can you put your hand up if you are a video game player? Let's see what the audience is. Which is like everybody. Okay, that's cool. I can thankfully skip the basics, so we should be out of here by 3:45. I've just come back from a conference in Chicago to do with the use of video games in libraries. So the second half of this presentation will be mainly about how video games are currently being used in libraries, various problems that are occurring and so on, and also the use of Second Life by librarians to actually provide services on the grid and so on for education and library services. Let's get used to this. Okay. Basically, very quick overview because we're all game players here, but there is a body of research that's now been added to for at least the last 5 or 6 years on the mechanics of video games, why people play video games and so forth. Before the end of the last decade, most of the research actually done in video games, academic research and why people play and players and so on was mainly done in the psychology and sociology disciplines. But since about the turn of the decade, this has now expanded into more or less its own field, though there is a lot of cross-academic, cross-sector research going on. Video games, as well as we all know, have been around for more than 30 years. So it's becoming easier and easier to actually justify doing research in them, in that video games are basically not a fad. Another reason for actually studying video games is the way that they've actually rapidly developed as a medium for communication, as a medium for entertainment and fun and so on over the last few years. The example, of course, is Pong, circa about mid-1970s. My first game was 1976, was a Binatone games console plugged into TV, had big cartridges in it, and it basically came with Pong and so on. And then that's, of course, basic tennis. Moving on to, not that long ago actually, I think that was one of the tennis games on my favourite games console, the Sega Dreamcast. And more up to date, we have even more high resolution, more realistic in terms of player movement, sound, just being able to watch the thing and think that you are actually watching something approaching a real tennis match and so forth. So the whole medium of games is kind of like in terms of the development and the closeness to various aspects of reality and so on has kind of like moved on in leaps and bounds over the last few years. I'll just move fairly quickly over some recent statistics. If you do various searches, you'll find lots and lots of statistics about who are playing video games, how they break down demographically and so on. There are in fact vast mountains of statistics on this now. Some of these come from academic studies, some of them come from the actual games market sector and should be taken with a pinch of salt and so forth. But it's good to focus on one or two things. In the UK especially, we have a quite right-wing media, and just about everything you hear about video games is quite negative, which I'll come on to. Basically in terms of video games are violent, video games are addictive and so and video games are just played by teenage boys in their bedroom as kind of like socially deprived experience. However, the actual true statistics and true demographics are a bit different, basically. There is a thing, this came out as well in the Games and Libraries conference, about the proportion of video game players who are female is actually quite high. Depending on different surveys done, the statistics come out at mainly between 35 and 45%, though in the last couple of years there's been a few outlying surveys that point above and below this range. What I think is a key thing that does tend to be overlooked is the average number of years that people have been playing video games, and a lot of them, I mean, I'm 38 and I've been playing video games since 1976, so I've been playing for all but 7 years of my life and so on. And I know people I went to school with and they're still playing video games, but the average amount of time that people have been playing is now up to about 12 years. The crucial thing is the average video game player age, and this statistic now comes up in a lot of, it came up in Chicago at the Games and Library one, only there it was 33, but there's at least a dozen studies done over the last 3 years that point to the average age of a video game player being between about 32 and 36. The kinds of people who are playing video games, again, a few more statistics, and also why they're playing them as well. The entertainment industry, the ESA did a survey in 2006, which is very, very positive in terms of, and very kind of like pro-gaming and so on, so things like that should be had with a pinch of salt. Why actually people play video games? Because they're asked to, because it's kind of like a social family experience and so on. They're kind of a bit keen to actually push the whole social family, in other words, gaming is not an isolated experience type thing. There's also, I'll just skip over that one actually. The issue of why people play video games, as we've had a few quotes from previously, and it basically boils down to two questions which academic researchers have been grappling with for some time. The academic research into games field is kind of like matured over the last few years, and there's major centres of research going on in places like Wisconsin, the MIT, and a few places southern of here in America. And in the UK, we have very small research groups in London, Bristol, and up in Scotland, in Glasgow, Caledonian. Mainland Europe, Scandinavia especially, there is a lot of games research going on, especially in Sweden, Copenhagen especially, and Tampere in Finland. But it basically boils down to two questions when actually looking at the issue of why people play video games. Basically, why is somebody actually doing what many people would interpret as a repetitive task? You do it again and again, the same thing over and over. And in terms of the applicability to education, to libraries, to what people would call the serious uses of games. Serious games is a phrase that's often used and so on. How can this kind of motivational force, driving force, enthusiasm actually be transferred and actually applied into learning situations? A basic summary of a lot of the research about why people actually play games. I mean, you've probably heard of the learning curve, but the main issue is because games are difficult in many ways. And James Paul G, when he speaks about this, he's kind of like written several books, and he's kind of like a leading evangelist for the use of games in learning. He points to the fact that games are difficult. I mean, he's like kind of like in his 50s, and he gets regularly beat by his 11-year-old kid when he's playing games. And he points out that there is kind of a top end and a lower end, and the good games go in between. If a game is way too difficult, then a lot of people do tend to give up. If it becomes too easy, then it becomes just purely repetitive, and people again give up there and so on. But it's a thing where you master, you move up a level, and that opens up new challenges and keeps you more motivated to actually go on, and in this kind of cycle of going further and further up, that motivates many people into continuing the game. And there's a whole thing with challenge as well. There's in the psychology field, there's a kind of body of work which points out Our everyday experiences are basically based around challenges in everything we do, either intrinsically or extrinsically and so on. And gaming, in terms of video game, is just one particular genre of challenge that we do as a kind of optional vocational extra. I want to move on to kind of learning this interest in the use of games for more serious applications. In the UK, especially in the last 3 years, various educational funding bodies have started to actually put money not so much into large-scale projects to look into games-based learning, but more into kind of studies of what's going on to try and bring together the research and so on. JISC, Joint Information System Committee, is kind of like the main technical support research service funded directly by the government for UK higher education and also further education now. These other bodies, Learning and Teaching Scotland, are kind of like more school-based, and Bector more school and college-based in England and so on. But all of these bodies have now in the last 3 years actually put interest. They've got working groups, teams of people. They've done various reports, though personally I think that they need to actually put more money into doing more kind of empirical studies and going into schools, collecting data that can be used in proper research on the use of games in schools and so on. As I was saying, there's been a lot of reports commissioned by these bodies trying to collate where we're actually going with the research. The main problem that the research community has had, or one of the main problems in the UK, is kind of like basically what we have in the mainstream media, which is the four main issues that come up repeatedly if you do any kind of literature search, and there are a few papers on this pointing out how games are portrayed in the media. The issues that mainly come up are the violence, the addictive qualities, and so the negative social impact. You know, kids play games, get fat, blah, 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 whatever. Also, when it comes to the games and learning, how accurate the content is, whether it's actually appropriate to the curriculum, whether it's relevant to the curriculum, and so forth. So with games that are commercial, there is a small, it is still a small niche within the whole games and education research sector on taking commercial games, what are called COTS, commercial off-the-shelf games, ones that are designed purely for entertainment and fun, and seeing if they can actually be applied to curriculum-based learning and so forth. And there is a kind of issue here with identifying those games which are relevant to the curriculum, which have an acceptable amount of accuracy and so forth. It's definitely drying up here. Other things that are a problem for the games and learning research community is the kind of arguments that we also have from parents and governors. I mean, a large part of the problem with doing this kind of research in schools, where you want to go in, you want to take games, digital games, either those that are designed purely for entertainment but could be used for learning, or ones that are designed more for overtly to fit in with some relevant part of the curriculum. The fact in the UK that you have to basically get the permission and the trust of the parents, the governors, the head teachers, the teachers themselves, the various support staff, and there's a whole myriad of problems. And there's technical issues as well. One of the main technical issues in the UK in many schools is networking licenses to actually get kids and wherever to be able to physically, for them to play the games. The software has to be loaded onto more centralised networks and so on. And there's often licensing problems that have basically sunk a few research projects into this. But there's the attitudinal problems as well that are encountered. You know, if learning is fun, it cannot be learning. That's kind of an ingrained thing. It's not. It's often portrayed as kind of older generation thing, though you see it in kind of like parents and people even younger than myself and so on. Most of these are kind of like enforced by the negative media stereotypes that we have. Learning wasn't fun in my day, and various comments. This one actually came up. Young people will lose the ability to hold paper if they use keyboards and computers too much. That actually came up at the Games, Libraries and Learning conference last year, actually by a librarian, which was kind of a bit depressing, really. So I said before, recap, there is kind of like a large body of research and a growing body of research into the use of digital games, though a lot of it is fairly new. The older research is mainly psychology and sociology. There's 4 problems with this, which I've listed there. The 4th problem, which we had an interesting talk with Daniel earlier, is actually measuring the effectiveness of a video game in terms of learning. There's one main problem with quite a few video games, especially commercial off-the-shelf ones that you try and use in schools, in that the most useful things from that a child, teenager or an adult can get from them is kind of like, unfortunately, it's a skill set that's actually very difficult to actually measure in terms of quantitative data and so on. Whereas schools, I gathered from the recent conferences, a bit like this in the US as well, schools in the UK are very heavily based towards league tables and so on, and so there's huge controversy that kids have to take too many tests, and the kids are being taught towards a test and so on, rather than actually being taught to learn useful things. And the whole thing in the school industry, school sector, is to try and get your school average test scores up to quite a high level. And those are the kind of, there's a skill body there that's not really relevant to video games in such the extent of the kind of skills, communication, awareness, cognitive thinking and so on, transferability that you can actually get from video games. Having said that, in the UK, there is actually a fair amount of commercial application of digital games that takes place in the school sector. The software market in the UK for schools is now about £130 million per year that schools actually directly spend on non-operating system software, and that figure is actually quite conservative. Most of the games, digital games, that go into schools are designed specifically by companies for learning and so on. So it's and the quality, if you go to events, it's quite a subjective view. The quality is very, very variable and quite different. I mean, I've been to quite a few trade shows over the years where you see some shockingly bad examples of games, just kind of like a very basic drill-based practice, which with no backing, no kind of empirical evidence and so on behind them, and also some quite good ones as well. There's kind of issues there over the whole quality thing, and more importantly, the kind of like testing, evaluation, to show that these kind of games are actually effective towards either curriculum-based learning or picking up a skill set that aren't totally relevant with the curriculum. A small number of schools actually use the COTS commercial off-the-shelf games, but I was saying it is quite a small minority field. Oddly enough, this is kind of, I'll just go, yeah. I'll come back to that in a bit. The digital games themselves, the ones that are commercially made, are actually used in quite a few different subject areas. You'll find examples in history, architecture, geography, mathematics especially. There's lots of different digital games used in schools, in the maths and the basic sciences and so on. Physics and chemistry as well. Cross-curricular games, of course, not surprisingly, are very popular because basically a school can buy one particular title and then use it in several different areas of the national curriculum, especially in the lower key stages. In the UK, the curriculum is split up into key stages 1, 2, 3, 4, and the lower ones are kind of like in I think it's the equivalent of your grades 1 to 4 in the US and so on, where there isn't such a concrete actual curriculum, and it's more easy to teach across several subject areas. I want to do a little bit of focus on Zoo Tycoon, because myself and a few other people last year and the year before, we were looking at the commercial games that were being used, the commercial off-the-shelf games, ones designed exclusively for fun and entertainment that were being used in schools. And we thought at first, just assuming that it was going to be Sim City and Roller Coaster Tycoon would be the most popular ones, but by far what we discovered that the title that was used by more schools in this particular area, way more than any other, was actually the Blue Fang developed, Microsoft produced Zoo Tycoon title. Are you people here like familiar with Zoo Tycoon? Okay, everybody's nodding except Daniel. You can play it later. Okay. Zoo Tycoon is basically a combination of business, economics, and bio and animal things. Basically, you have you start with an amount of money, you design the zoo, you build enclosures, you populate them with animals, but you have to learn basically what the animals eat, what kind of enclosures they require, and so on. So, for example, if you skimp on costs and build fences that are just not adequate or too low, then the lions will escape and probably go into the gazelles and eat the gazelles, or start eating some of the tourists. And basically you have the attractions as well. You can see on there the fun fairs, the concession stands. And it's actually, I've seen 2 classrooms now in the UK use this, and it's actually quite intense, the amount of thinking that goes on. It's also very orientated towards team-based learning and so on, in that there are a lot of decisions to be made in running a zoo, even in this kind of simplified situation. And so you have the situations where you have like a small amount of money, and you do start off with what appears to be just a totally inadequate amount of money, and to start off with to build up your zoo over time. And kids, they usually, the good teachers, they get them into groups where they argue and make the case we should spend some money on this, should spend some money on this, and not so much on this to see if we make a profit. But the key, Boston especially, there's like loads of schools in the Boston, Massachusetts area use Zoo Tycoon, and the main reason for it, from the feedback and interviewing people, is that it crosses so many different curriculum areas. You've got the basic arithmetic with all the economics, finance, business, economics, then the whole thing with animals as well, the whole biome, which geography as well, because you have to design your zoo, terraform it and so on. And then there's ethics classes as well, where you've got the whole ethics issue of whether animals should be caged up, preserved, or whatever, in zoos and so on. And in the UK, basically in the higher key stage areas, I mean, Zoo Tycoon actually crosses a heck of a lot of different subject areas. So in that respect, with the cross-curricular thing, Zoo Tycoon is a particularly potent title, and that's probably the number one reason. And teachers have said that as well, why they quite like using it. It's also good because, in a kind of odd way, it's a one kind of violent title that actually parents quite like. Something that came out, and that you do have the animals, they escape, and violent things can happen, though not in too graphic a thing. And the kids love it as well when that things happen, and the parents don't kind of mind it as either. Oh dear. There's also various plugins and extensions for Zoo Tycoon and variations and so on. So that's kind of like the marine park type extension as well, where of course you have the dolphins and whales and so forth. And again, the whole thing is like business economic animal type simulation. Digital games in health. There's also there's kind of like it's largely a separate area though, over the whole arc of serious games. There is some kind of crossover, but various medical funding bodies of different kinds, both private and public, have put a fair amount of money into designing, developing, and getting out individual games on that help mainly kids, patients, and so on. Also, some kind of parent awareness. Also in the UK, there's actually a number of doctors as well who've kind of like they're heavily into video games, and they've helped design and promote various kinds of games as well that mainly help kids kind of like alleviate pain, especially. Unfortunately, I had some good pictures here, but for kind of like copyright reasons, I had to take them out. One of the main things against in the popular media against video games is somebody plays them for a long time, they get very fat, overweight, and whatever, and die, whatever. Though I suspect after being in Chicago for a week, it's more likely that the 42-ounce sodas that you can get for 89 cents at McDonald's probably have much greater reason for why there's so many fat people there than playing video games, but whatever, that doesn't make such good media material. There is a thing against this now, that there is a small but very popular number of video games which are quite active. The footage I actually had, but I can't use, is of the use of Dance Dance Revolution in schools in the UK. These are individual schools where the teacher has actually usually badgered and got some money to get a TV and get the dance mats and so on. And in the cases we did find, this has actually been hugely popular, and kids have been coming in their lunch break, coming even after school and so on, and playing Dance Dance Revolution and similar games as well. But in all the cases in the UK, the teachers they basically had to go out and get their own funding and face various obstacles. Still they have, especially in 2 cases, parents and governors saying this is not good because the kids are playing video games, despite the fact that in the UK we have a problem with schools. Over the last 20 years, a lot of schools had big playing fields and they got gradually sold off for housing development, so sporting and physical stuff, even though it's on the curricula, it's much more restrictive than it was in my day when I went to school and so on. There's basically 2 different models of teaching that use video games that have come out of several studies. This is quite important because there is a kind of myth when it's ever mentioned, maybe to governors and some teachers and some parents, of we actually want to use video games in the classroom in some way, and that there is the automatic assumption that their child will be sitting in isolation playing a game on their own. It'd be like monastic silence and so on. However, the most successful models in terms of results that can actually be measured in the UK are, the first one is where Tim Rylands is a prime example of this. The teacher is actually the guide, so the class act as one, and the teacher is sort of like a mentor who helps them go through the game, like we do Tycoon, and points them at various things to do, and makes people in the class say, what should we do now? A member of the class puts up their hand, then says what they should do, and then the teacher makes them justify their decision. The other model is the teacher a referee, where it's a more competitive base, where the class is split to several teams and the teams compete against each other using the video game as a kind of basically like an old-fashioned game board and so on, to try and see who can win. Not necessarily on an economical front, but in other criteria depending on the game and depending on the subjects, the part of the curriculum that's being covered. I want to move on to my badly written next section, which is kind of more to do with the use of digital game in libraries. And basically I've just quickly put in some areas where digital games are becoming relevant to the library sector and so on. First one is the preservation of video games. As we said right at the start, video games have been around for 30 years or so now. So there's a question of different formats, old types and so on, where they should be preserved. You go into a library now, main one, it's not just about books, journals, but there's kind of like CDs, DVDs, VHS and so on. So there's a whole issue about the preservation of video games. Some national libraries are doing it, but that's only a small number. France, and they're still thinking about it and debating it at a high level in Britain as well. Second one, which is quite a negative one, is the issue of using video games as a pacifier for keeping kids quiet in public libraries, which some libraries do. The third one, and there are some really good examples of this at the ALA Games Learning and Library Symposium, of getting people into the public library. So supposedly maybe as a Trojan horse type thing, get them interested in, just basically get them through the door, not necessarily as a kind of to kind of like gang press them to, we've got you through the door, now you must go and do boring things like read books and so on, but just to show them that a library isn't like an old outdated place with nothing of relevance to them. Lending games, small number of libraries, though increasing more in the US, where you can actually borrow games, and again circulating support materials. more popular, borrowing the walkthroughs, the cheats, and so on. The various books that you can get with to show you like how to get through Zelda much more quickly. Libraries as where you can actually, this is a problem in academia actually, with Loughborough University I think was one of the ones that have got a big problem. Their halls of residence are all networked up so that in the student rooms the students can just go online and so on. It's all connected with the library system. And then a couple of years ago, a lot of the students, they came up with their Xboxes and started playing Halo online, and that created big problems across the campus network. Let's move through there. Another one as well, and there are a couple of research projects that have been looking into this, and I think there are certainly on, actually it was a homebrew thing on the PSP. Somebody actually knocked up a kind of thing where you could actually go and search the library catalogue in a particular academic library, and they were doing this quite unofficial thing, quite a neat thing where you could go and find certain types of items, and even though it wasn't totally GPS enabled, it would actually help you go and actually find it in the library stacks. Library research of the game, there's the whole issue of information literacy, making not just finding a book and so on, but the whole issue of finding information, student being more qualified to determine what is good information, what is bad information, whether it's in print form, electronic form and so on. So there are various initiatives at various stages and so on to see if that can be developed into some kind of game or game-based learning. Covered by that as well. There's also digital library support. There are various, in Europe we have the European Framework Programme, and there are various projects going on there at the moment which involve digital library centres, digital library partners and so on, involved in using digital library software and know-how to help develop learning games that will be used across schools, especially in the Baltic states and Eastern Europe in several projects. Online gaming, not necessarily that much to do with libraries, but I'll put this in anyway. This is the chart which shows basically the popularity of World of Warcraft and how that went up very rapidly from at the midpoint of July. I'm assuming here that most people are familiar with Second Life and World of Warcraft. Yeah, okay, good. There's an issue here, and this is I think this is level 60 basic screen of World of Warcraft, and there were some quite good talks in a conference in Holland last year about this, about basically when somebody's playing World of Warcraft, the tremendous amount of information that is not only on the screen. This is static, but the whole thing is moving, and okay, you don't have to read and monitor everything at one go, but there's a huge amount of information that is on the screen, is appearing, is changing, and the player actually interprets while carrying out decisions such as where to move next, other players to communicate with, tasks to do and so forth. So a tremendous amount of not only thought processes but interpreting the information on the screen. And that is kind of something that interests a lot of digital library researchers as well. The digital library research community is quite an old one, and they deal with not just doing narrow things like so like Google and so on, though that did wholly come out of the digital library research community. Google was actually designed by two digital library researchers who kind of like gave up and never actually finished their PhDs, but had the minor benefit of becoming billionaires instead. And the thing with World of Warcraft is that, and other games like it, is that there is a large amount of information flow going between the player, other players, and actually occurring on the screen as well. As with the chat systems, talking to other players, communicating either in real time or messaging or whatever. And there is a large amount of research interest in this, in the digital library and the digital gaming core research communities about what is happening from a cognitive level and how some of this can actually be applied to proper learning or more formal curriculum-based learning environments. I shall, coming back to the library, the more explicit library information science tying in that, there is the issue of, well, if when you're playing games such as World of Warcraft, Many games are kind of information searching thing where you're looking for particular types of information. It's not usually the kind of overtly explicit information, and so you have issues there about an interesting going on as well of how the players are actually finding the information, whether that kind of skills and so on that are being developed through the video game can actually be transferred into a more formal learning environment. How long have I got left? Okay, right. I want to move on the third part, kind of rambled on a bit, into Second Life, because this has become quite a big thing in the library sector. I mean, there's over 600 active and known librarians, public, academic, business, science-based librarians who are active and openly developing things within the Second Life environment on the grid, the main grid, and also in the team grid as well. And this has become quite a big thing in the library sector. At the Games and Learning Conference in Chicago, we had a whole one-day track just dedicated to Second Life and how various libraries are actually using it. And if you wander around to Cyber City and Info Island and so on, there's quite a few islands which have collections of libraries on. There's different models for how they've got on there. Some have got support. Some have been given land and buildings which they can develop. Others have actually got whole islands and so on, depending on their particular funding model. I kind of want to talk about two surveys that I've got involved in, which kind of like run in parallel. The first one is finished, though we're going to repeat it. Again, that was to do with looking at how many universities and colleges in the UK were actually actively developing in Second Life for curriculum and learning-based purposes. And by actively developing, I mean actually they've got some land, they've got a building, and they're actually doing stuff developing, not just flying around in avatars, that doesn't count, but actually doing stuff which will be directly related to what their students will be doing in a curriculum basis. And the second one is looking at Second Life development into a library. This is kind of like an ongoing survey that's not at such an advanced stage, basically. But the two surveys actually have a bit of an overlap. And we basically used not just mailing lists but also Facebook groups, various Google groups as well, sent out things via contacts who we knew had lots of other contacts of people who were developing in Second Life, and just tried to find various people who'd be happy to talk. And we asked 6 questions which kept deliberately vague. So the number one is the most important one of all. Why are you actually doing this? And I'll come on to the answers in a minute and so on. What functionality? In other words, you know, you go on Second Life and you'll go to loads of places and they've got like really pretty building, where it's just a building and it's pretty and there's kind of like no functionality in it. So it's a case of what kind of functionality are you putting inside your university building or your academic department installation in Second Life, or your public library. Basically things that people can interact with or provide some kind of facilitation for learning, accessing databases or course or classroom support. How much time? Who authorised it? That's an important thing as well. Basically, in the UK it turned out it was very fragmented, that some universities were trying to really heavily control the Second Life development and basically send out emails saying no academic is allowed to do anything without the marketing department say so. In other universities, you'd have lone academics who would be basically quietly developing their own island or building and so on, which they still were going to involve their class in next year. How busy it's been, what impact has it had so far? The UK Higher and Further Education Study turned out to be a massive shock, and there's a bit of a rumpus about this at the moment. Because we did it in March, around about Easter time, and we only found 6 universities and colleges that were actually actively developing stuff. We did it again very recently, and the report only went live a week ago today, and at that point we'd actually found 41, and since then we've had a load more responses. And it's kind of, for the last 2 days we've actually been able to say, actually the majority of UK universities are actively developing in Second Life, which a lot of people didn't believe. So if you actually download the report and it's there, that URL, you can actually go and look at the appendix, and it's got all the Second Life locations. Not all of them you can actually go to, because a lot of universities have actually made their islands limited access, so you can actually only go onto there when they've finished. because another thing we discovered that a lot of them were aiming to do a kind of open marketing campaign starting in the 2007-2008 academic year. Some odd things that we found is that in the UK we have the older universities such as Oxford, Cambridge, St Andrews and so on that have been around for really hundreds of years, and then we have the new universities that have only been quite recent, only the last couple of hundred years or even earlier and so on. It tended to be the newer universities where a lot more development was being not just happening but being actively supported and even funded and so on. For example, University of Coventry, University of Hertfordshire, both used to be polytechnics. They're both launching their islands fully. You can go to them now in September, and both at the start of the academic year. They're both being launched by the Vice-Chancellor, the top man, and his avatar actually is going to do it both in real life and in Second Life. Some of the older universities, and one in particular is quite notorious, they've basically been kind of like threatening the worst cases, basically threatening the students who've been setting up their own development in Second Life and saying no academic or student can set it up until it goes through the marketing department. All has to be on this island, all has to be branded, buildings have to be the same texture, blah 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 and so on. And it's partly because of the way that the new universities and the older universities are structured and their various mechanisms. The older universities especially, we discovered, tended to have a much stronger marketing department, which in many ways seemed to control development, and also alumni as well, where they got a large amount of money and was very, very important in those. New universities only have, relatively speaking, a weaker alumni because, well, they haven't been around so long. So that wasn't such an important factor, getting money from that particular source. I'll skip through these are various examples of libraries. Waterford Institute of Technology, that's a group of libraries, academic ones in Ireland and so on. They've got their own particular area and so on. Important point that the person involved in this, David, said this is actually the meeting area in Second Life where the lecturers and the students can meet at timetable times, and he made the point of which I'll come on to again, of it's absolutely ridiculous to recreate exactly what you have in the physical real world because you're so restricting yourself. So, hey, let's just have a tropical island floating and that will be our meeting space, rather than a boring room that's underneath our main student union where the main meeting rooms are in this particular campus. For the library survey, so far, this is slightly out of date by a couple of days now. We're still getting responses, but there are basically several hundred libraries on Second Life, and we're trying to, we're not entirely sure where we're going from here, but we're going to try and see if there's any kind of different matches, different kind of conclusions we can draw from different kind of libraries, academic and public ones and so forth, over the remainder of the survey. Basically going through those 6 questions for the library survey, why are you doing this? We had a very, very different way, range of responses and so forth. Some of them said that it was going to be so they could run classes and so forth. Others said it so it's kind of promotional, marketing thing, help make their web presence. A lot of them, though not so many as the academic survey, proportionally, have said that they are setting up their particular library island, library building as a kind of meeting space for doing timetabled or just casual drop-in meetings. There was generally quite a wide range of reasons why people said it's kind of like land is cheap. There's the thing in Second Life that land is actually relatively cheap, and so on. Though the amount of time that you actually need to put in to develop can overall make the cost much higher. And also a slightly dubious reason, we're only doing it because other libraries are doing it, which I thought was a bit iffy. Universities have said that as well. Basically, the whole competitive thing in UK higher education. Example of medical library. This one's in Holland. Quite a big one. Theirs is an interesting one, the Second Life Medical Library, because if you go there, they're trying to install, they have installed various search facilities, so you can search on PubMed, the kind of like main, or one of the main medical reference materials. You can do Wikipedia and Amazon searches for particular medical and health related things. So theirs is quite orientated towards getting information either directly through various kind of note-based and other-based facts functionality, or also actually searching internet-based mechanisms. Most frequent functionality that was mentioned by libraries, 5 in particular. Displays, nearly all of them mentioned that they've set them on an island and so on, so they can have various displays around it. Links to other websites, invisible logging so that they can see how many visitors, who they are, who are going in, note cards, seated meeting areas. In the academic survey, nearly every academic university said that one of the reasons they set up the building or island in Second Life was to have kind of like a meeting space for either for the students on their own or for classrooms or for teachers to meet students and so on. Again, libraries, there's a whole other range of things as well, surveys, video screens, audio channels, the ability to, we have things called like Ask a Librarian and so on, where you could summon a person in the real world to go and help you. This was the best example we found of functionality. There was some research done and it found that in Australia and so on, farmers, in the real world I'm talking about, they only basically read when they're in the dunny. The dunny is kind of like the outside toilet on their farm in Australia. So in the kind of like National Australian Library, they kind of like built a facility which was like a virtual dunny, a virtual outside toilet with kind of note cards in, so that farmers supposedly could actually go in there, recognise it, and then click on the various note cards to get different kinds of information, which you can see in the top right corner of the screen. How much time have facilities taken? It's quite interesting this, because one of the speakers near the end of the conference made the very telling point that they reckon it only took a third of the time to like upgrade and develop the Second Life presence than it actually did to upgrade the general website for their library and so on. Despite that, there's still the whole process of learning how to do things in Second Life and so forth, and a lot of people are spending a lot of time doing it, both in the education sector and the library sector, and a lot of the time it's their own dedicated time that they're doing it with. We have, I don't know how, well, in the UK we kind of like have library schools, departments of information science, information studies in universities, and this is where kind of like the librarians of tomorrow, as they say, they get their master's degree and they learn various information retrieval skills and so forth. It's kind of like a very mixed attitude in library schools in the UK to having a presence in Second Life. University of Sheffield, officially they're not going to have any presence, but some of the academics, Sheila Webber being one, they want to do various kinds of research in Second Life, so she and other academics as well, they managed to set up an office somewhere else, so she set up her University of Sheffield research office inside the Edgeserve Island and so on. Whereas other library schools such as University of Loughborough Department of Information Science, this is James, that's him on the video screen in real life looking at his avatar. As you can see, he's only just started because it's mainly a blank land. He's getting the functionalities together. And he's going to be developing various structures for the teaching of students on the library school for the next academic year, and also for a wider campus-based presence for the university. Who authorised and funded? Again, it's quite a wide variety. In a lot of cases, academics were finding money, and librarians as well, from all kinds of different budgets. In the newer universities, there was often like large amounts of money come from official sources, marketing departments and so on. Libraries, again, quite diverse. In some of the older universities where the marketing department hasn't quite discovered yet what they're up to, money has been kind of like just moved around from different budgets and so on. Quite a few academics we found in UK universities, they haven't got an island, but they've just got a building in a kind of discounted area, which they funded out of their own pocket, which is good in one sense because they're up and running. Bad in another sense because it could be that next year, quite possibly, the university will go and buy an island and build an official presence that will be somewhere way over on the grid. So they've got the issue of, do they move the whole thing and start again, or do they just keep separately where they are at the moment? Interesting when asked both surveys, the teachers and librarians, how busy has it been? About half of them responded in terms of number of visitors, and about half responded in terms of activity such as meetings, events and things like this where people got together. The numbers are quite varied. In the UK, in the universities, the open universities, like way ahead of all the others in terms of what they're actually doing. They've actually been running for quite some time on both the main grid on 2 islands, whole islands, and on the team grid, various classes for their courses. The OU is kind of a bit special because the Open University isn't kind of like a proper university with buildings that several thousand people go to every day. It's mainly orientated towards distance learning, right away from degree up to higher levels and so on, where you do your thing and it comes to the post of the different modules, and you go to the summer school for 2 weeks every year and go to exams. So they're way ahead, but the other various installations, that they report quite different amounts of busyness or amounts of time. Impact in the library sector, especially, various reasons have been given. Raising awareness was the one that came up most often, and so on. People coming by and so on, being aware that there is some kind of presence in Second Life. The issue of actually talking to colleagues as well. Various libraries, especially in academia, which is split amongst several different campuses. There's actually a way of like communicating with your other colleagues there. Quite positive one of actually enforcing a kind of more positive image of an academic library, or even a public library as a place which is a technological leader, where they've actually got a presence in Second Life. So it's not just about old books and 50-year-old women librarians with buns on their hair and pearl, the old horrible stereotypes, but a place where they're actually just building really useful stuff and so on, and actually showing that they are out there and they've got the technology, they can handle it, and they can use it for information dissemination and for communication as well. The increased visitor and collaboration aspect. This one is what some people call the mother load. I think there's the top one. We have people come to visit us in RL Real Life because they saw our Second Life library, and that's kind of like the aim that a lot of people are kind of like hoping for, of having a Second Life presence, because that will also justify to any particular funding body or governors or wherever for actually putting in the time and the staff effort into maintaining a presence on the grid. Yeah, that's the University of Hertfordshire. They've set up the island in Second Life and so on, and it's kind of an exact physical replication of part of their campus in the real world. So this is actually the learning information, the Learning Resource Centre. I should know this because I did my degree there many decades ago now. And as you can see, it's like quite detailed, and there's whole stacks of books and things. Two things. One, there's kind of like no functionality. You can't take a book off a shelf or look at the individual spines. Number two, there's no people around or anything. So this comes back to the issue, and this keeps coming up on the various education and library mailing lists and so on. This is like the most frequent debate. If you have something like a university or a library in the real world, do you replicate it exactly on the grid as it is in the real world, or do you just try and do something completely different? And as you can see in both columns, there's arguments either way. Resemble is good because it's something immediately familiar, students are familiar with and so on. You make it new, then you get past all the restrictions of stairs and walls and roofs even that you have in real world, and you can actually use the functionality more. We also, and this was kind of like more of the crossover between the two studies, we asked the various academics who we found were actively developing in Second Life with the library, whether the librarian was involved and so on. And the responses we got generally was that the head librarian in their academic library, the university librarian, was quite aware of what was going on. They weren't actually developing, but they were quite aware, and they were keeping close tabs and so forth. Some, again, the Open University, the librarians there were actually already holding meetings, doing kind of staff development and so forth. This final one for this part of the survey is quite a telling one, basically, in that the librarians, Anglia Ruskin is kind of like a new university in kind of like South East England and so on, and the librarians there were quite interested, the head librarian and also the more junior staff, of what was going on, but they needed kind of a more justification, more explicit, obvious reason for actually investing their own staff time in developing their own presence within the institutional island on the grid. I think I'll skip over those. Yeah, there's various other surveys that have come out as well recently, and blog meetings about why libraries should actually develop on the grid and so forth, such as staff training, staff collaboration. These come up as well. This from the Umbrella. Umbrella is kind of like annual UK conference of libraries and librarians and so forth, and they had an online meeting at CILIP, which is kind of like the Library Information and Professionals overall body, and they came up with various reasons as well, such as recruitment. They're slightly surprised at that one, and various others as well, for why a library should perhaps have some kind of presence, an academic library and public library, actually on the grid in Second Life. Anyway, the future steps is that with both surveys we're collecting responses still. The education one, we've got to do an update sooner rather than later, because we're just getting virtually a tidal wave of responses from various academics. We've got a problem with the education one in that we've got several universities now where we've got academics doing their own thing, and marketing departments and alumni definitely doing their own thing, which is quite different. And in one case, the one doesn't know about the other, and there'd be like quite big arguments and so forth if they did. And there is kind of like there are going to be instances in the UK, and they are emerging, where we can have kind of like fragmented universities, or kind of like with an official presence on one island and various academics doing things on running courses in buildings on other islands and places, which is going to create their own internal marketing, branding and coordination problems. But we're going to continue with both surveys anyway, and just see what comes out of them. I've kind of like rambled, literally rambled around everything basically, and I think that's all I'm going to say. I think I've touched on everything, though not gone into anything in any great depth anyway. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Second Life, Silver Sprite Helsinki, Flickr, Facebook, or if you want to have a long chat, you can do it now, or have a longer one if you give me a lift to the baseball, because I've got a ticket for tonight. Okay, that's me.
We have time for some questions.
Well, it's not a question so much as to add a little information. The Library Congress has just funded a couple of grants on preserving digital worlds, and my institution, I'm at RIT when I'm not here, and we've just gotten a $500,000 grant from the Library Congress to look at specific preservation issues for digital worlds, which goes well beyond preserving media. It's about how do you preserve the experience, and it's a challenging question to think about, but there's clearly a pressing need for thinking about preservation issues in the context of games and virtual environments. And then one other comment is, I think libraries are making, and I say this as a librarian and as a university educator, I think libraries are making a huge mistake with this rush into Second Life, because their users aren't there. And this assumption that the users will be there, I think, is deeply flawed. And I suspect when people start really looking at who's on their islands, they're going to find other librarians, not their intended library users. If you note, almost every picture you've got on there is of a deserted space, which I find problematic. I don't think it's a bad idea for libraries to be investigating these areas, but putting large amounts of staff time and development into these seems to me a jump way ahead of where the need is. We're not living anymore in an if you build it, they will come kind of technology world. So,
Would you like to say, because I saw, oh no, it's a keynote speaker from Chicago. Would you want to say who you are and what?
I'm Liz Lawley. I'm a visiting researcher in Lily Chang's group over the summer, and I work at RIT during the school year.
130 million pounds spent in software in the UK above OSs. Do you know what that's spent on currently today? Sort of the breakdown between games and applications and other things?
Oh, the games would be a small part. I mean, it's quite, not a very small part. That would still probably run into tens of millions. It depends. You've got the more overtly games and ones where games have been integrated into larger pieces of software. That 130, actually, I was looking at it again and looking at some more recent data, and that's actually quite an underestimate. It's probably nearer the 200 million and so on. Some of the games, it's quite shocking. There's kind of like a big conference, trade show, the SET one in Scotland every year. I mean, I go to it because it's my nearest one. I live in the middle of nowhere off the coast of Scotland, and there is a significant minority of the software that is trialled there and available for sale to teachers is game-based stuff, not just 1 or 2 stands, but dozens in there amongst a couple of hundred. And the thing that always gets me, I'm actually quite shocked about how expensive what looks like very simple stuff actually is for schools, running into hundreds of pounds. Even when it's a multi-user license and so on, it's still staggeringly expensive compared with your normal video games.
For your survey on libraries using Second Life, I was wondering if that was sponsored by somebody in particular, or if it was just for academic purposes.
No, the EduServe Foundation sponsored the kind of the education one, and the library one sort of came out of that. We were going to do the 2 at first, and then we separated them, and then we thought after a while maybe a bit of a mistake, because we kept finding, they are sort of different segments that overlap so much. It was quite interesting. I being a UK person, I don't go to the US much. Going to the Games Learning and Library Symposium and hearing so much about education and so on, and just still trying to figure out in my head, especially in the US, all of the overlaps between the library and education sector. I was quite taken aback actually by the first day of the Games Learning and Library one, where we had several keynote speakers, all of which actually were mainly from games and education, games and learning research, and all of whom seemed to be very vociferous, outspoken against this No Child Left Behind type initiative and so on. But getting back to your point, that the library one and the education one that have both come out of EduServe Foundation, they're kind of like an independent body. They're kind of like quite impartial.
Is there another resource at Microsoft that's really studying the whole business psychological model of what these virtual reality sites are about, or how to improve them?
Sorry, was that a question or?
Yeah, it's a question. I'm trying to find more research on kind of the psychological piece of all this stuff. So
Maybe Lindy's
not so much
Yes.
about.
Yes, and if
you know
you
what I
want
mean?
to talk to me afterwards, I can point you towards some of the people in the company who would be good contacts for that.
Super, thank you.
I'm actually the wrong person here. It should be Liz who's up here talking, and she's more qualified than me and everything. So, yeah.
I'll talk out this week.
Any more?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for attending and listening.